On the evening of July 4th, 1965, Mary Mars Cowing, a 39-year-old homemaker, indulged in a night of revelry alongside her husband, Dr. Madison Cowan III, a distinguished professor of hematology at the Kentucky Medical Center. Accompanying them were their friends, Sam and Betty Strother. In a quintessentially American spirit, the quartet celebrated Independence Day at the exclusive Idle Hour Country Club. Their expenditure on libations exceeded $40, a sum that would equate to over $300 in today's currency. Sam Strother later estimated that each of the four enjoyed approximately 10 beers throughout the evening. After an exuberant night of dancing and socializing, the group returned to the Strother home, a mere 3 streets from the Cowing residence. Feeling unwell, Mary was driven home by Sam, the husband of her friend. The couple's 2 children, along with the Strother child, remained at the Cowing household. Upon their arrival, a taxi was called to return the babysitter to her apartment at 12:30 a.m. However, due to a mix-up, it took over an hour for the vehicle to arrive. While Sam enjoyed a beer and kept the babysitter company downstairs, he noted that he departed around 1:30 a.m., leaving the door unlocked until the babysitter was collected. He remarked that Mary did not come back downstairs. Meanwhile, at the Strother residence, Dr. Madison Cowing and Sam continued their evening of drinking and camaraderie until approximately 3 a.m., when Dr. Cowing deemed himself too inebriated to return home alone and opted to stay the night, a decision not out of character for him. The following morning, Betty collected her child along with the Cowing children and transported them back to her home for breakfast. After learning from her child that the Cowing children had not yet eaten, she took them to a nearby swimming class. Upon returning to the Cowing residence after dropping off the children, Betty attempted to reach Mary by phone multiple times without success. It was then that she discovered Mary still seated in her bedroom, unnaturally still in a dark chair, her head tilted to one side. The chamber lay in serene silence, her bed impeccably arranged. Betty surmised she had merely drifted into slumber. Yet, upon closer inspection, the grim reality struck her. Mary had succumbed, not merely to the aftermath of a revelry, but to a grave affliction. Isolated and gripped by fear, Betty reached out to both Sam Strother and Dr. Cowing, Mary's spouse, who arrived post-haste. Sam Cowing was tasked with disposing of the drink resting on the bedside table, following Dr. Cowing's somber declaration that Mary had taken her own life. Instead of alerting the authorities or calling for an ambulance, they opted to contact one of Dr. Cowing's medical colleagues. It was only after the crime scene had been compromised that the police were finally notified. The coroner required 6 weeks to classify her death as a homicide. The subsequent autopsy revealed the chilling truth. Mary had been stabbed twice with a needle containing an unknown substance, with 2 puncture marks visible on her thigh. The autopsy determined that carbolic acid poisoning was the cause of death. According to the CDC, carbolic acid can induce a range of symptoms, including nausea, profuse sweating, headaches, dizziness, tinnitus, seizures, coma, respiratory failure, and ultimately death. Mary's blood alcohol level hovered just beneath the lethal threshold of 0.4%. This intoxication may have rendered her particularly susceptible to an assault, allowing her assailant to administer the 2 injections, which the police initially presumed to be a sedative. The elaborate method of her demise, the spiking of her drink, the dual puncture wounds, and her elevated blood alcohol content seemed to unfold like a scene from a cinematic thriller. And as any seasoned viewer knows, the husband often emerges as the prime suspect. Despite the entreaties of Mary's father, the esteemed George Swinebroad, a prominent figure among Kentucky's thoroughbred auctioneers and the seller of numerous future Kentucky Derby champions, the couple's marital bliss was far from reality. Dr. Madison Cowing, the ostensibly heartbroken husband, was far from the devoted partner one might expect. Mary had received a request for divorce from Dr. Cowing, yet the legal proceedings had yet to commence. In addition to his wife, he was entangled with 2 other women. His first liaison was with Dr. Emma Lapat, a hematologist at the hospital and a divorcee, with whom he had been involved for over 2 years by the time of Mary's passing. Following this, Dr. Cowing began a relationship with Barbara Liepman, the wife of a colleague and one of his patients battling Hodgkin's disease. Barbara quickly became Dr. Madison's favored companion after his split with Dr. Lappet. The unfaithful physician later confessed to authorities that he was in love with her, despite Barbara's husband being far from amicable, issuing threats of violence against the man who was seeing his wife. Mary Cowan was aware of the infidelity and worried about the potential damage to her husband's esteemed reputation and their family's legacy, particularly since his second affair involved a patient, putting his medical license in jeopardy. Complicating the situation further, Barbara, who would eventually become his mistress, was pregnant and sought an abortion from Dr. Madison, expressing her fears that the procedure might not occur. After Mary's death, it remained uncertain whether Barbara believed her boyfriend or her husband was the father of the child. Naturally, Barbara's husband, Dr. Liepman, would have faced serious charges had the affair been revealed. Yet, there was an even darker possibility lurking in the shadows: Dr. Lappet. This woman was known to be exceedingly controlling, frequently driving past Dr. Madison Cowan's residence and calling his office in a bid to maintain contact. She even informed his secretary that she had no obligation to relay any calls from Mrs. Liepman to Dr. Cowan. Dr. Liepman found himself increasingly distressed by Dr. Lappet's obsessive attention, prompting him to modify his departure routine from the office. He began to hang his coat in various locations, deliberately making it difficult for Dr. to monitor his movements. Dr. Lappet frequently referred to Dr. Liepman as Barbara's husband, making bizarre and disjointed remarks regarding his wife's alleged infidelity, all while withholding the identity of the supposed other party. These unsolicited calls were not only peculiar but also intrusive, often probing into Barbara's past without any clear context. The most unsettling of these communications occurred in the early hours of July 5th, between 2 and 3 a.m., when a call was received allegedly from Dr. Liepman's wife. A receptionist answered, relaying that he was urgently needed at home. By this time, Dr. Liepman had grown suspicious that the woman inquiring about Barbara was, in fact, the caller, not his wife, and that the intent behind the call was to lure him home to confront his wife's betrayal. Realizing that Dr. Cowan was the one involved in the affair only fueled his anger over the incessant late-night calls, leading him to contact the police. However, without a clear identification of the caller and no crime having been committed, the authorities could take no action, deeming it merely a phone call. Months after the initial murder, Barbara Liepman received her hospital test results concerning her Hodgkin's disease. These results were handed to Dr. Lappet, a colleague in hematology, while Dr. Cowan was off duty. Dr. Lappet determined that nitrogen mustard would be the most effective treatment, a substance classified under Schedule 1 of the Chemical Weapons Convention. Barbara firmly stated that Dr. Lappet was not her physician and that she would refuse treatment until Dr. Cowan returned. Following Mary's unexpected demise, Dr. Cowan continued to see Barbara, exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior. 5 days following Mary's untimely demise, he conveyed to her that the pathologist had suggested she may have ingested an excessive amount of Alka-Seltzers, leading to a buildup of gas in her system that ostensibly resulted in a heart attack. This assertion was peculiar, given that the pathology department had yet to ascertain the definitive cause of death. With no further leads or witnesses to guide them, the police found themselves mired in speculation regarding who might be attempting to resolve lingering uncertainties: the unfaithful husband, Dr. Cowan, the envious former lover, Dr. Lappet, or the bitter spouse, Dr. Liepman. Years later, when a writer sought insight from Dr. Lappet, she claimed to have never crossed paths with Dr. Cowan. To this day, no perpetrator has been brought to justice, and Mary's case remains shrouded in the chilling classification of a permafrost cold case. On July 16, 1973, the vibrant 21-year-old Conchetta Serra, affectionately known as Penny, decided to indulge in a day of shopping in New Haven, Connecticut, taking a well-deserved break from her role as a dental assistant. She borrowed her father's car for this outing, parking it gracefully on the 9th level of the Temple Street garage. Just before the clock struck 1 p.m., 2 teenagers observed Penny fleeing from a man, believing she had successfully evaded him. As they saw him return to the vehicle moments later, clutching something glimmering in his grasp. However, Penny's escape was tragically short-lived. In her desperate attempt to ascend a staircase, her assailant caught up with her mere steps away, delivering a fatal stab to her chest. Her lifeless form was later discovered curled in a fetal position within the confines of the narrow concrete staircase. Penny's maturity belied her years, shaped significantly by the trials she faced. At the tender age of 11, she lost her mother, Pauline, to cancer in 1963, which thrust her into a role of responsibility within the family. She took on numerous duties to ensure the household ran smoothly, while her father, John Serra, dedicated himself to his brake shop. Penny managed the cooking, adorned their home, handled the shopping, and lovingly cared for her cherished younger sister, Rosemary. John Serra would later reflect in 1984 that Rosemary was entirely dependent on Penny, a sentiment echoed by friends and family who recognized that he, too, relied heavily on his eldest daughter. Following the devastating news of Penny's death, John was rendered unable to eat or leave his home for several days. Despite her youth, Penny had engaged in a relationship with a man 7 years her senior, and although they were once engaged, she ended the relationship due to their frequent disputes. Initially, police considered her former fiancé a potential suspect, but he was quickly cleared, with numerous witnesses providing him an alibi and his fingerprints failing to match any found at the scene. In the years that followed, DNA evidence would further exonerate him. The evidence gathered from the parking garage painted a grim picture, suggesting that Penny's demise was not rooted in personal animosity. Rather, it appeared she was murdered amid an attempted theft of her father's prized possession, a striking blue 1971 Buick Electra, a vehicle that undoubtedly would have caught the eye of any car thief. Just 2 weeks before her tragic end, Penny had taken this elegant automobile on a vacation to Florida, bringing along a knife intended for slicing bread and cheese, which was known to be in the car. However, upon police examination, the knife was mysteriously absent. A blood trail snaked through multiple levels of the garage, with additional blood found within the vehicle itself. Authorities surmised that an assailant approached Penny with the intent to steal the car, prompting her to defend herself with the knife, likely inflicting a wound on his left wrist, as indicated by the blood evidence. This act of self-defense seemingly incited her attacker, who pursued her, a scene witnessed by 2 teenagers. Instead of simply taking the car after she fled, he stabbed her in the staircase, ultimately stealing the vehicle, but becoming disoriented in the labyrinthine garage. He abandoned the Buick on the 7th level, leaving behind its keys and Penny's bloodied handkerchief nearby. As he made his way back through the 6th and 5th levels, a blood trail marked his path to retrieve the car he had driven to the garage. Shortly after Penny was seen fleeing in terror, a man believed to be her assailant emerged, driving out of the garage and handing a blood-stained parking ticket to the attendant. When asked if he required assistance, the man declined, and the attendant, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, merely wiped the blood from the ticket to determine the fee owed. The man's vehicle sped away, leaving no trace of its license plate as he vanished into the night. On that fateful day, 2 security guards were stationed at the garage, yet they ventured across the street for a shared cup of coffee. In the aftermath of Penny's tragic murder, John Serra took legal action against the garage's owners for negligence, ultimately settling for $200,000 outside of court. Of this sum, $30,000 was earmarked as a reward for any information leading to the capture of Penny's assailant, while the remainder funded John's relentless personal investigation into the case. For at least a decade following his daughter's death, John dedicated 8 hours each day to the pursuit of justice, all while managing his business full-time. He inundated the police with calls, providing leads that kept the investigation alive. He enlisted the services of a lawyer and a private investigator, spending his evenings traversing the streets of New Haven and revisiting the parking garage. With keen eyes, he scrutinized the left wrists of every man who entered his establishment or crossed his path, searching for a scar that might indicate a connection to Penny's attacker. When these efforts yielded no results, he turned to psychics for guidance. Each year, On the anniversary of Penny's murder, John placed an advertisement in the New Haven Register, featuring his daughter's photograph, a poignant reminder that her killer remained at large. The case seemed to take a turn in 1984 when an arrest was finally made. Anthony Galino, a former high school classmate of Penny, had been one of the countless individuals interviewed by the police in the years following her death. By 1981, investigators began to hone in on him. Galino's ex-wife approached the authorities, revealing his history of physical abuse and a chilling threat he had made, claiming he would do to her what he had done to Penny, a statement he vehemently denied. Notably, he bore a scar on his left wrist, consistent with the injury inflicted by Penny during her struggle. On July 3, 1984, he was arrested for her murder. Upon Galino's arrest, he informed the authorities that his blood type was O, mirroring the blood type discovered at the crime scene. However, his blood was never subjected to testing for verification. The analysis would not occur until May 1987, just before the commencement of his trial. In reality, Galino possessed type A blood, which exonerated him from suspicion, leading to the dismissal of the murder charges against him. His attorney lamented that the repercussions of the arrest had irrevocably tarnished Galino's life. Tragically, he succumbed to cancer in 2008 at the age of 57. In the 1990s, investigators once again believed they had unearthed the identity of Penny's murderer, this time in the form of an Albanian immigrant employed at a restaurant frequented by Penny, who also happened to be a patient at her dental practice. 2 dental invoices belonging to him were discovered in the Serra vehicle, and the lot attendant recalled that the individual who had handed him the bloodied ticket spoke with an accent. On 2 separate occasions, a year apart, law enforcement sought warrants for his arrest, yet both times the judge declined to authorize them due to insufficient evidence. Despite his relentless pursuit of justice for his daughter, John Serra would not witness the apprehension of her killer, passing away in 1998 at the age of 74. Even in his final days, he remained a fervent advocate for Penny, reaching out to Dr. Henry Lee, the forensic scientist involved in her case, from his hospital bed, imploring him to keep Penny's memory alive after his departure. At the time of that poignant conversation, Dr. Lee had a promising suspect in mind, but was unable to disclose this information to John Serra. A bloody, unidentified fingerprint had been discovered on a tissue box within the vehicle Penny was driving on the day of her tragic murder. It wasn't until 1997 that police finally matched the print, identifying it as the right thumbprint of Edward Grant from Waterbury, Connecticut. Grant's fingerprints had not appeared in any criminal database until 1994 when he was arrested for domestic violence against his then-fiancée. Authorities were hesitant to proceed with the arrest of Grant based solely on a single fingerprint, prompting the need for additional forensic examinations. Among the critical pieces of evidence preserved was a handkerchief belonging to Penny, discovered in proximity to the vehicle. This handkerchief bore bloodstains from both Penny and an unidentified male, presumed to be her assailant, who likely sustained injuries during the altercation. The DNA extracted from the blood on the handkerchief corresponded with Grant's genetic profile. Furthermore, a chemical analysis of paint chips retrieved from within the Buick linked them to the auto body shop previously owned by Grant at the time of Penny's tragic demise. On June 24, 1999, less than 8 months following the death of John Serra and nearly 26 years after Penny Serra's murder, 56-year-old Edward Grant was apprehended for the crime. Grant steadfastly proclaimed his innocence, asserting that he had been in Vermont on July 16, 1973. He did, however, acknowledge in court documents his involvement in a Jeep accident in 1964 while serving in the Connecticut National Guard, which resulted in a severe head injury necessitating the insertion of 4 metal plates in his skull. This injury led to episodes of memory loss and emotional instability. During the trial, his defense team contended that no clear motive existed for their client to commit such an act, and that the evidence had languished in storage for an excessive duration before DNA testing. The trial spanned 20 days, and after 3 days of deliberation, the jury rendered a guilty verdict for Grant in the murder of Penny Serra on May 28, 2002. Rosemary Serra, present in the courtroom at the time of the verdict, was overcome with emotion, expressing, "After all these years, my family can finally find peace. My father believed in the system, and now I can, too," as she exited the courthouse. Grant received a sentence of 20 years to life in prison, maintaining his innocence while remaining incarcerated at the McDougall-Walker Correctional Institute. Tana Togstad graced the world with her presence on August 20, 1968, in the charming town of New London, Wisconsin. She was the youngest of 4 siblings, with an older sister, Veronica, and an older brother, Richard, followed by the arrival of a younger brother, Jeffrey, 2 years after her birth. The family faced a profound loss in 1985, with the passing of their father, David, yet Tana's spirit remained unyielding by the sorrow that enveloped them. In 1987, she proudly graduated from New London Senior High School and soon embarked on her professional journey as a machine operator at Cherney Company Incorporated in Weyauwega, Wisconsin. While her affection for her family was unwavering, Tana felt the call to carve out her own path. By 1991, at the age of 23, she began a relationship with the 35-year-old Timothy Mumbrew and relocated to a picturesque farmhouse on Butternut Ridge Road in Royalton, Waupaca County. Despite her new independence, Tana maintained a close-knit bond with her family. Her sister, Veronica, and her husband resided in a mobile home adjacent to Tana's, while Richard's home was a mere 1.5 miles away. Tana shared her farmhouse with Timothy and their beloved dog. On the evening of March 20th, 1992, Tana and Timothy enjoyed a night out at a local bar in Clintonville, Waupaca County. They departed between 11:30 p.m. and midnight, returning to their home. As dawn broke around 4 a.m. on March 21st, Veronica was stirred by a noise and noticed a suspicious truck reversing out of her sister's driveway, heading westward, though she dismissed it as inconsequential. The following day, when Tana and Timothy were uncharacteristically unreachable, concern grew, prompting a welfare check by the authorities at their farmhouse. On the afternoon of March 22, 1992, Detective Donald from the Waupaca County Sheriff's Office arrived for the welfare check, leading to a harrowing discovery. In the bedroom, he found Tana Togstad, Timothy Mumbrew, and their dog, all tragically and brutally stabbed to death. The crime scene revealed numerous print impressions, some stained with the victim's blood, yet no weapons were found. The news shattered both Tana and Timothy's families, leaving them in profound grief. They expressed that neither Tana nor Timothy had any known adversaries and were utterly perplexed as to who could have perpetrated such a heinous crime. The remains were transported to the medical examiner's office for meticulous examination. Upon completion of the autopsies, it was disclosed that Timothy had suffered multiple stab wounds while valiantly attempting to defend himself. His body bore numerous injuries to the neck, head, and chest, with various punctures to the heart and lungs. In contrast, Tana succumbed to a solitary stab wound to the chest that penetrated her left lung. The sole piece of physical evidence linking the assailant to the crime was bodily fluid discovered on Tana's body. However, subsequent DNA testing yielded no matches within the criminal database. For years, law enforcement pursued potential leads, conducted interviews with hundreds of individuals, and collected DNA samples from various suspects. Yet the investigation yielded no results, and the case ultimately went cold. In 2013, a person of interest emerged, Glendon Gooker, a man already charged with the murder of another individual and the assault of his girlfriend in 1990. Nevertheless, he was never formally charged in connection with the murders of Tana and Timothy. As the families of Tana and Timothy continued to ponder the identity of the perpetrator, the case once again fell into obscurity. Over the years, numerous false leads surfaced, leading investigators astray. The case was finally reignited when a DNA sample was retrieved from a pen used by a suspect during a traffic stop on July 6, 2022. Forensic analysis confirmed a complete match to the DNA found on Tana Togstad's body. The suspect was identified as 51-year-old Tony Haas, a man long suspected of the crime. Tony Haas was not an unfamiliar figure to the Togstad family. Both families resided in the same community and shared a close acquaintance. However, his connection to the family ran even deeper. At the tender age of 7, Haas experienced the tragic loss of his father in a snowmobile accident, a calamity that occurred while racing alongside 2 other snowmobiles, one of which was driven by Tana's father. On the fateful evening of the murder, a 22-year-old Haasi found himself indulging in copious amounts of alcohol, his mind inexplicably drifting to the memory of his father's passing, which had occurred 15 years prior. In a haze of inebriation, he made his way to the residence of Tana Togstad, though the motives behind this decision remained shrouded in mystery. Haase later asserted that he harbored no intention of causing harm. However, his subsequent actions told a different tale. When Tony Haas was brought in for interrogation, he initially distanced himself from the crime. Yet, as the questioning progressed, he divulged that he had spent the night traversing various bars, drinking alone. Following the news of the murder, a wave of anxiety washed over him as he recalled fragmented memories from the previous night. He expressed fear that he might have been involved, though the details eluded him due to his intoxicated state. Investigators pieced together a harrowing account. Within the farmhouse, a confrontation with Timothy escalated, resulting in a fatal stabbing. In a moment of chaos, as Tana cried out, Tony struck her and inflicted a deadly wound to her chest. He maintained that the events of that night were a blur. When questioned about his failure to alert the authorities, he claimed he wished to avoid the appearance of a premeditated assault. On August 12, 2022, Tony Haas was formally charged with first-degree premeditated murder, with a staggering bond set at $2 million. Tana's brother, Richard, expressed relief that justice had finally been served, acknowledging that while he did not know Haas personally, he felt sympathy for his family. Tragically, Tana's mother, Helen, passed away peacefully on August 14, 2022, having learned the identity of her daughter's killer.